And I'm going to officially say good morning. Thank you for being here today. I think we have a fun class for today. We are going to be painting a sleepy fox.
Oh, I love it.
And this is a special request from Sinden. So I'm glad we're finally getting around to this. So this is going to be really fun. I'm going to do some different things than we have before. Some different techniques using the spray bottle for our background. It's going to be really fun. So we're going to do a little bit of drawing for the fox. I'm going to walk you through that. And then the rest of it's pretty much going to be brush strokes. So it's going to be a fun class. So thank you for that idea. I'm going to switch my screen here so you can see my workspace. Sometimes it takes a minute. And I'm going to go over the supplies for the class today. So first of all, we're going to be drawing on this 1-inch grid paper. Hopefully you have that printed out and ready to go. If you don't, hopefully you drew a 1-inch grid. That's fine too. Or if you want to freehand it, that's totally fine. So this is just to help you sort of create the drawing a little bit easier. I also have some tracing paper. So we're just going to need 1 sheet of tracing paper, similar size to your drawing paper and your watercolor paper. And then a piece of 8x10 watercolor paper or similar size. I'm using this fluid, a 100. This is an 8x10 size. This one is 300-pound cold press. I'm going to talk about this one because this is a new one for me. So I've been kind of experimenting with that one. And I think there are pros and cons to it.
I'd like to hear it.
Yeah. I'm not sure if we're going to need this ruler, actually. I put it on there, but it was only for the little small straight lines, I think. So if you don't have one, it's not completely necessary. A number 2 pencil or drawing pencil of your choice. I just use these Papermate Sharp Writer pencils. Kneaded eraser if you have it. This is just nice so that it doesn't leave the eraser bits on your paper. I've got 2 brushes today. One is my number 6, or you could use a number 8 also, something in that size range, round brush. And then I've also got this smaller brush. I've got a number 1, but you could use a 0 or a 2, just something smaller to sort of help us with the little details in the painting, like these little hairs. It could also be done with the number 6 brush, with the tip of your brush, and then the eyes and the nose and the ears, and maybe these branches. So like I said, if you don't have that, you could probably do it with your number 6, just using the tip of your brush. That would be fine too. As far as paints go, we are going to be using some sap green. I have that here in my palette, some cadmium yellow or lemon yellow, any yellow that you have that's kind of close to that. I use cerulean blue in the background. You could also use ultramarine blue if you don't have cerulean, but cerulean is a really nice sky color. So that's why I put that on the list. Burnt sienna. I also put burnt umber, which is the darker brown, on the list. If you don't have that, we can just mix some of your burnt sienna with Payne's gray or one of the blues that you have to make a darker brown. That's sort of what we're aiming for, is a darker brown there. So those are the basic colors we're going to be using. And I have my palette here. I use tube paints in this palette. And also underneath my palette, I have some paper towels, or you could use an old kitchen towel. So that's for cleaning and blotting your brush. Also, if you have a roll of paper towels handy, I like to keep one next to me. It's useful for blotting and things like that. I also have painter's tape. I use painter's tape mostly. You can also use artist tape. Either one of these works fine. This is to stretch our paper onto our work surface. So if we don't stretch our paper, it tends to buckle when we put a lot of water and paint on it. One thing I'm noticing with this fluid paper, and I left the tape on, so this was my example, I left the tape on here on purpose so I could show you. Usually with most of the papers I use, either painter's tape or artist tape will peel off of the paper cleanly and not take any of the paper with it. And I'm finding no matter what I use, this is the artist tape and this is the painter's tape. Uh-oh, I see BJ. Excuse me, let her in. Hi, BJ.
There it is. Hi.
Hi, hopefully you weren't waiting too long. I got started and then I was, you know, how I talk. So we're just going over supplies.
Good. I've got them out.
Yes.
I'm
So,
about ready to text you.
so I was just talking about this watercolor paper that I've been using, this fluid watercolor paper. I really like it, except for this one thing I'm talking about right now. It seems like no matter if I use the artist tape to stretch it or the painter's tape, the paper comes up with it. Do you see that up here?
Yeah. Oh.
So I taped it really close to the edge. I don't have this problem with Arches or Strathmore or any other of the papers that I've used so far.
I have a problem with Fabriano.
Oh, okay. So maybe it's like a softer paper too. This seems to be a softer paper. So anyway, just something to be aware of if you use this paper. And it doesn't seem to be like if I left the tape on too long or anything like that. It seems it immediately pulls the paper off. So
how do you like it otherwise?
I like the surface. I like how the paint reacts to it, and it has kind of a nice, it's a little bit smoother surface texture, I would say, than Arches. So maybe a little bit smoother than I would like, but it's not like as smooth as hot press, which is completely smooth. But I don't know if I would buy this again. I tried not stretching it to see how that went. And it's still like the whole paper kind of curled up. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about this one. I probably wouldn't recommend it. It's definitely not the worst paper I've used. It's just, I guess these kinds of things, they're just something to be aware of. And if you're okay with that, or if you want to paint, you know, smaller things on it where you don't need to stretch it, it might be fine, you know? So anybody who wants to try it, I still have 3 or 4 sheets. Just let me know and I can send you one, or if you want to pick one up from the gallery if you're coming by. Okay, so back to supplies. So I've also got a spray bottle. So we're going to be using this spray bottle in a brand new way today, and it's going to be fun. But usually I just use the spray bottle to spray my paints and maybe add some water to my mixing area. We're going to be using it on our paper as a technique today. Also got a water container. So I just use these short cottage cheese containers. They are less likely to tip over. And I think that covers supplies. Any questions about any of the supplies before I move on? Anybody not have anything?
All set.
Okay, good. All right. So we are going to start with the drawing. So I'm actually going to move this stuff over just a tiny bit. Everyone can see my workspace.
Yes.
Okay. So the only thing we're going to be drawing today is the fox. And I like to sort of break things down into shapes, and I use the grid just so that we can keep things in proportion. But like I said, if you don't like the grid and you don't have one, you can draw it freehand also. So we're going to draw the fox on our grid paper, and then we're going to trace it, and then we're going to transfer it to our watercolor paper. So this technique of drawing it separately and transferring it to the watercolor paper just lets us end up with a nice clean drawing to start with on our watercolor paper, rather than doing all of our sketching and drawing and erasing on our watercolor paper. So I'm going to set this guy aside for now. I'm going to walk you through the steps. And I will send out my drawing with the step-by-step instructions after the class. So you'll have this example of my drawing if you want to try this again. So the first thing we're going to do is draw the head. And if we look at the head here, it's kind of an oval shape. So we're going to draw that oval shape, and the body is also kind of an oval shape. So really, those are the two main parts of this fox, the head and the body, and the rest are sort of details that we're going to connect together. I'm going to put him over there so we can kind of see what we're aiming for. Now you can start pretty much anywhere on this grid, because all we're going to be doing is drawing the fox. So we're not going to be drawing any of the tree in or anything like that. So you can kind of pick a place to start with on the grid, or you can draw in the same area that I'm drawing in. But if you want to put it more into context, I'm going to start from about the fourth row up and the third column over. So I'm going to be starting in this square right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw the oval around this square, just to make it a little bit easier on ourselves to make this oval. So I'm going to start by, so this is the square right here that we're aiming for. I'm going to start by just drawing a little curved line at the top of that square. And like I said, yours doesn't have to be exactly the same square, because this is all we're drawing. But if it helps you keep it into context, you can use the same one. And then I'm going to do the same thing underneath. And then we're going to draw a sort of fatter curved line on either side of this square, so that our oval is a little bit skinnier this way and a little bit fatter this way. So I didn't quite go halfway into the neighboring squares, maybe about a third of the way. So that's sort of our main head shape here. Okay, so the next shapes we're going to draw are these ears. So those are really just triangle shapes. So we're going to connect. I'm going to make a point of reference about a third of the way up in the square above that oval where I want my ears to end. And then I'm just going to draw some triangle shapes connecting those dots to that oval head. And as you can see, the inside of those triangles are a little bit shorter, and then I'm extending the sides down onto the side of the head. And we're not going to draw the inside of the ears. We're just going to paint that in when we get there. Okay, so next, we're going to elongate this head, and we're going to start by making that nose right there. So we're going to make a little oval nose just like that in the middle of the square, right below that oval head. You can either color it in or you can just make an oval shape. Either one works. Now I may have made mine a little bit big. That's kind of a big nose. I'm going to make mine just a little bit smaller. And then we're going to draw a line, just a little curved line right underneath that oval. I'm going to pick up my paper so you can see that a little bit closer. So just a little kind of like a smiley face smile underneath that nose. So that's going to be the bottom of our snout there. And then we're going to start forming the snout. So we're going to draw these lines here. So these are just kind of lines that go up to the bottom of that oval shape. And then to complete this part, we're going to draw an inward curving line that connects the bottom of that snout to that oval shape for the head. I'm going to pick that up so you can see it a little better. Everybody doing okay? Good. Okay. Now we've got a couple more details here for the head, and the head is the most detailed part. We're going to draw these little lines here. Actually, first we're going to elongate the snout just a little bit further up into that square where we started. So I'm just elongating that a little bit. So I went about not quite a quarter of the way up there. And then we're going to draw these eyes. So these eyes are just pointed oval shapes. And we're going to start at the top of these lines. And then we're going to end right on the side of that square. So I'm going to hold that up so you can see how I did that eye. We started at the top of that snout and just created that pointed oval shape that ends right on the side of that square.
Perfect.
So those are your eyes. And then we've got this little white area here. So we just need to draw a line kind of in between where the eyes are and the top of that square below it. A little curved line that forms like, I guess, the cheek. Like that. So this line right here is what I just made. Yours could be higher or lower, and that's fine. Now, we've got this bottom part of the oval here. I'm just going to take my eraser and erase that part that's cutting through the snout there, just to clean it up a little bit. Okay, so we're going to move on to the body here. And the body again is another kind of big oval shape, the way this guy is kind of like curled up and sleeping here. So we're just going to draw that, and then we'll add the hind leg here and the tail. So we're going to start by drawing this top part of the oval. And we're going to draw that top part between the head and then these two squares over. So I'm just making a point here, 2 squares to the right of the head. And then I'm going to connect, kind of like we did with the top of the head. I'm going to start by that ear, and I'm just going to draw a little curved line. You can kind of sketch it if you want. Doesn't have to be super precise. Little curved line up there. So that's sort of the top of our oval. And we're just going to take this in pieces to make it a little bit easier. And then we'll draw the back part of the fox. So we're going to connect this point to a point 2 squares down from that. And we're going to go all the way to the edge of this square. So 3 squares over to the right from the head. So we've got this point, this point, this point. So we're just going to draw a rounded line. Doesn't have to be super precise at this point. Like I said, just a nice sketched line to draw the back. All right, we're going to continue on to the bottom. So we're going to draw this bottom of the tail here, same sort of curved line, and we're going to span it over these 3 squares. So we're going to start at this point, 1, 2, 3 squares to the left. That's going to be our point of reference there. And we're going to draw a slightly deeper curve here. So I would say we're going to go about 1/3 of the way down into those 2 squares. And we'll just connect this and let it flow into that line that we just made. So I'm going to hold that up a little bit closer so you can see that. So I kind of rounded it into that curve over here at the back of the body.
You're so smart.
Well, it just, if you break it down into shapes, there's, it just makes it so much easier, I think. All right, we're going to draw just the end of this tail here. So I'm going to end the tail about right here, halfway between these 2 squares. And so we're going to draw a little line that curves up this time, because we want our tail to kind of flip up at the end. So I'm going to hold that up so you can all see that a little bit better. And then to complete the tail, we're going to connect it to the side of the nose here. So right at the bottom of that, where the snout line comes down, we're just going to connect that with another line that curves up like that. So it's going to end right at the bottom of that snout. We're almost done with this. Now we want to complete our oval over on this side of the head. So we're just going to draw a little slightly curved line right over here on the side that connects like kind of the side of the face to the tail right there, just slightly curved. So now we can kind of see our whole oval here, our curled up fox. Okay, so the last part is just this hind leg curled under and the rest of the tail. So I like to sort of give myself a point of reference to shoot for. So I'm going to end the tail right here, about halfway between the line here, just one square to the left of where the body ends. And I'm just going to start on the right side of that snout, kind of the opposite side of where we ended the tail over here. And I'm going to make a line that curves down slightly, kind of following the same curve as the bottom of the tail here. And it's just going to end right where I drew that dot. And then the last piece of it is just this round part here. And we're just going to draw a little curved line right there. I'm spanning that line right there, right above the kind of where the tail ends.
Wow.
Okay, now before we trace it, which will be our next step, is to trace this onto our tracing paper. We're going to do something a little bit different here. Because when we go to paint this, we don't want a hard pencil line outlining our fox. How do I know this? Because that's what I did the first time I made this painting, and it didn't turn out very good. So I thought to myself, well, how can we trace this onto the watercolor paper without ending up with that hard pencil line that will be very hard to cover up? So what we're going to do is we're just going to draw little hairs like this all the way around the edges. So I'm just going to hold this up so you can see what I'm doing here. Those little lines. It doesn't have to be super precise. Basically, what we're doing is we're just giving ourselves a guideline for where to do our painting when we trace this onto the tracing paper. So for the outside of the fox and these parts and the head and the ears, we're not going to be tracing that hard line. We're going to be tracing those little hairs. So I would say for those of you who like measurements, they're about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch away from each other, but I wouldn't worry about getting too precise. Like I said, if you just draw these little diagonal lines all the way around, some width from each other, it's just going to give us that point of reference for our painting. So I'm doing that all the way around the tail. And then this hind leg. And then same thing around the edge of the body there. And the ears. And if it doesn't seem to make sense right now, it will when we start painting. So I've got these little lines. Anywhere that you would normally see hair around the top of the and the side of the head. I didn't do it here on the side of the face where the snout is, but all the way around the body, all the way around the tail and this hind leg. You could do it the other way too. I have an example. This was my first one, and it worked, but you can still kind of see the line underneath. I tried to cover it up with the brush strokes. So you could do it that way, but I like to find an easier way if I can. All right, everybody doing good with that? Ready to move on?
Mhm.
Okay, great. So we're going to grab our tracing paper. So I'm just going to take one piece of tracing paper here and my tape, my painter's tape or my artist tape, and I'm going to get 2 little pieces of tape and I'm going to tape my drawing right at the top and put my tracing paper over that and also tape it right at the top. And then before I start, I'm just going to write the word front at the top so that when I'm done tracing it and I turn it over, I know which way is up. And then we are going to trace this guy, but we're not going to trace the outside hard lines. We are going to trace those little lines that we just drew. Anywhere we drew those. So I'm going to hold this up so you can see this is what you want your tracing to look like so far. Now, when I get to the side of the, like the cheeks and the snout, I am going to draw those lines. And of course, the nose for the oval, I'm just tracing over that oval. We don't have to color it in. Same thing for the eyes. Those lines, those curved lines under the eyes that create that white area. And
Since it's brown, could you use like a watercolor pencil
yeah, you could. I don't know how well that would
transfer?
transfer, but it would be interesting to experiment with that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, you know, you could also use a light box to transfer it to your watercolor paper without doing the tracing paper bit. Just put the drawing underneath your watercolor paper on the light box and then use a watercolor pencil to trace it.
Yes.
So I'm going to lift this up. So this is what you should end up with when you are done tracing or something very similar to it. Of course, yours is going to be your own. It doesn't have to look exactly like this, but these are the lines that you are shooting for on your tracing.
It does transfer.
Oh,
If
that's good to know.
you really put a lot on there and press hard.
Uh-huh.
And it transfers lightly.
Mm. Well, all you need is a light
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
tracing. So cool. How's everybody doing with that? I'll take that as a good. I see BJ is still working. Looks like Cinden's still working. Give you a couple more minutes. So while you're still tracing that, I'm going to talk about that big painting that Cinden was, some of you might have missed the conversation, but on the website, I have a page for all of the artists and there's a picture of me painting a big sunflower. That's the one you're talking about, right, Cinden?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was a project. Actually, it looks like most of you are done. So I'm going to move on to the next step and then I'll continue that. So we're going to, when you're done tracing, we're going to untape the tracing paper from the top and we're going to turn this over upside down. So I'm just going to move this guy up a little bit. And we're going to take our pencil and we are going to rub graphite on the back of our drawing over all of the lines. So you can see I'm just making some big scribbles here. Nothing super precise. We're just rubbing graphite on the back of the tracing so we can use that graphite to transfer our drawing to the watercolor paper. It doesn't need to be super hard as far as pressure goes with this. We just want to make sure that we have graphite behind each of those lines. Like that. So I've just got these nice thick lines now on the back of the fox. And then I like to take a little piece of paper towel or tissue, whichever one you have handy, and just lightly, very lightly kind of smooth that. So we're not trying to take any away. We're just trying to smooth it a little bit. And you might notice there are little particles of graphite and you can just shake those into your garbage can or somewhere. So I'll let you all finish up that and I'll continue my story. So before I had the gallery here, I volunteered at a nonprofit organization called Tualatin Valley Artists. And they had a venue called Influence Music Hall in Hillsboro, downtown Hillsboro. So it was like a concert music venue. They had an open mic night every Friday. And they previously had an art gallery when they were in a different location. And while I was there, I reopened the art gallery. So we had a gallery / music hall. And we did this project. One of the other board members got a grant to do this project, like a community art project. where we painted the ceiling tiles, those big ceiling tiles. So that's what that is. It's
Wow.
one of those big, rectangular ceiling tiles. So the whole ceiling in this music hall was painted by different artists in the community. So that was my painting.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, so they closed during COVID permanently. All the ceiling tiles were taken down. Some of them were salvaged and some of them got broken. They're really fragile, that material. There's another restaurant down the street called Pizza Rio, and they put as many of them that they could up in their ceiling because they had a kind of a similar project when it was a different pizza place before it was Pizza Rio. And I don't think mine is up there. I don't think mine made it. But when it was the other pizza place, Earth Oven Pizza, when they were doing their ceiling tile project, my son and I painted one. So the one that my son and I painted is still up there. But so that's the long story to that picture.
Mhm.
Interesting.
It was a very fun project though.
Yeah.
It would be really, really fun to get some big canvases and do an in-person class someday when we can and just paint big, huge sunflowers or something, right?
Yeah. I want to paint bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is great. I'm thrilled with this.
Well, we do what we can for now, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay, so I hope everyone's got their graphite on there. I'm going to take, I just untaped my tracing and I set it over here. I'm going to untape my drawing and I'm going to set it aside. I usually just tape it to the side of my desk. And let's get our watercolor paper. I'm going to get a piece out. And bring it to our work surface. Now I would recommend stretching. So, oh, I had it underneath. That's where it went. I knew it was somewhere. I am going to stretch my paper. And I would recommend it unless you have some thicker, like if you have a different brand of 300-pound cold press, you might not have to. But we're going to be putting a lot of water and paint, which causes it to buckle quite a bit. So I'm going to be stretching mine. And so I'm going to take my painter's tape and I'm going to tape. Now for this one, since normally I would tape about 1/2 inch up into the paper. Since this one, I know it's going to take some of the paper off with it, I'm going to tape a minimal amount so that it won't show behind the mat when I mat it. So I'm taping down and I'm pressing down with my finger just to make sure that tape is really, really secure. And I'm going to do this all the way around. And when we stretch our paper, we want to leave it taped down and stretched until our painting is completely dry. And then take the tape off. And when you take your tape off, I suggest lifting it in sort of a diagonal way. So sort of holding it down and pulling it on the diagonal, not straight up, but to the side. And for most papers, that's going to reduce the risk of pulling the paper up with the tape.
What kind of a background are you taping your paper to?
Oh, I think I missed that in the supplies. Thank you for asking. I have here a small piece of coroplast board. So this is the type of board, and I'll put it this way so you can see. It's corrugated plastic basically. And this is what they print signs on, like those yard signs and things. So I bought some large pieces of that and I cut it down. I use this one for my 8x10 paintings. I also have bigger sheets that I've bought for the bigger classes. But this is a nice size because you can move it around rather than putting it under all of your supplies. This way, if you need to move your painting around, you can do that. So that's what that is. If you don't have a board like this, you can paint it or tape it right to your work surface as long as it's, a waterproof work surface. So like this is just a table with contact paper over it. I don't know if you would want to do that on a wooden table, but if you have Formica or something like that, yeah, that would work fine. Traditionally, back in the day, we used huge masonite boards for this. So that works well. Or if you have like some sort of a drawing board, I've even used clipboards that you can get at the dollar store. Those are a pretty good size for 8x10. So anything that you can sort of tape it down to that's rigid and waterproof is what you're looking for. Even like if you have a thick piece of acrylic, like plexiglass, I've used that too.
Okay.
And if you would like a piece of this 8x10 Coroplast board, I would be happy to send one to you in the mail, or you can pick one up at the gallery. I have boards that I've cut down and offered to anybody in the classes. So just let me know if you're interested in that. All right, so now that we have our paper stretched, we're going to take our tracing and we're going to bring it back around to where we can read the word front. So that's the front of our drawing. And now you can just sort of place this guy wherever you want him to land in your composition. I have him sort of down towards the bottom. So he's like laying in the grass here. So that's sort of what I'm shooting for, is right towards the bottom. And, if you want him off to one side or something like that, that's up to you. I'm going to put him kind of in the middle on mine. And then I'm going to take one of my small pieces of tape and I'm just going to tape that at the top like that. So this doesn't move around. And then I'm going to take my pencil and I'm just going to trace over all those little hairlines. So yes, we have to redraw this again to transfer them to the watercolor paper. Now I'm going to do a few here and then I'm going to lift my paper up to see, is it transferring? And yes, it is. We don't need it like super dark, just dark enough so we can see it. So I don't know, it's pretty light, but hopefully you can see how light that is. We just want a guideline for our painting. So it doesn't have to be super dark, just dark enough so we can see it. So it takes sort of like medium pressure, I would say. You don't want to score your paper per se with the pencil, but just lift your paper, your tracing paper up once or twice to make sure that everything is transferring. So I'm just going around here and tracing all those little lines. If anybody's interested, I did make a video on the website and I send it out with the class's email too, that goes over sort of like my setup for the classes and what I use and recommend and things like that. It's not a super long video. I can't remember how long it is, but it's not too long. But if you're interested, you could check that out.
And that was on the website?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's on the classes page. It's either on the classes page or on the classes page, there's a link to another page that goes over like kind of basic supplies and brands and things like that. It's on one of those pages. And what I'll do actually is I'll be sending out the recording for this class today later on, along with the step-by-step instructions for this painting. And I'll just include that link in that email.
Thank you.
It'll be fun.
So this is what we're shooting for here. All those little lines traced onto our watercolor paper. I think, you know, having the right supplies and the right setup, or a good, I shouldn't say right, but because there's so many different ways and so many different supplies, but feeling confident about your supplies and your setup just really helps you feel more confident about painting in general. So I'm always happy to, you know, help and answer any questions about those kinds of things, supplies and what I use and different options. So when you're done, you can just take that tracing off and set it to the side or tape it to the side of your desk or your table. Everybody doing okay with that?
Mhm.
Okay, we'll take another minute and then we're going to paint. So while you are doing that, I'm going to clean up my palette just a little bit here. And I'm just using my spray bottle to spray. I'm going to go ahead and spray my paints too. So I'm just going to give each one that I'm going to be using a little squirt of water. So again, we'll be using Payne's Gray, cerulean blue, burnt umber if you have it, burnt sienna, and yellow. I've got a cadmium yellow in my palette. Like I said, lemon yellow. If you're using the Van Gogh colors, they have an azo yellow, very similar. The cadmium yellow is going to be more of an opaque color, and your lemon yellow is going to be a more transparent color. It doesn't really matter for this painting. Okay. Doing okay, BJ?
It's not transferring well today, so just keep going and I'll catch up.
Okay. So I'm going to open up my water container, and you won't be able to see it because it's off in the upper right-hand corner, but it is there. I'm going to move this guy over, move my palette over so you can see my mixing areas a little bit better. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to paint the foliage for this tree. So the process for this tree is we're going to use our spray bottle. We're going to spray this area and then we're going to just dab our paint into that wet area. So the reason I use the spray bottle is because I kind of wanted it to be blotchy. I didn't want to wet the whole area because I wanted some white areas too. Some white dry areas, if that makes sense, to show through. I did the same thing for the sky and the grass. So that's the new thing we're going to try today. So we're going to spray this area and then we're going to add our greens and yellows, and then we're going to let that dry while we work on the other parts of our painting here. And at the end, we're going to take our burnt umber or darker brown and just add those little branches in there as if they're peeking through that, those leaves. And I did add spatters to the whole painting. I really got into spatters with this one. So that's what we're going to start with. So I'm going to set this off to the side. I'm going to take my spray bottle and I'm just going to spray up sort of in the corner of that paper. And I know it's really hard for you to see. I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm trying to turn it so maybe you can see that it's like kind of glistening. Oh, there we go. So you can see like the water droplets and they're glistening. And that's sort of what I'm going for up in that corner. And don't worry if it got, went too far or anything. We're going to work on our background first, and then we're going to work on the fox. So this is sort of what I'm going for with the spray bottle here. So sort of wetting that corner.
It seemed like I have excess water. Should I daub a little off, or I mean,
Well, how much excess? I've got, if I pick it up, it kind of drips, and that's okay.
a serious puddle, but I'll
Maybe a bit, maybe blot it a little bit. You can take a little bit of
got it.
Paper towel, and if you have some big puddles, you can blot them.
Okay.
We do want, a fair amount of water, but kind of like in a blotchy way.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to take my green. So I'm using a sap green. You could also use a hooker's green, which I do have. Either one of those is going to work for this. And we're just going to start sort of dabbing green. I'm just literally dabbing it. So I'm not even like really painting here. I'm just dabbing that green sort of with the side of my brush into that water. And I'm taking it right out of the paint well because I do want it to be fairly dark. So I'm not really mixing it with too much water. I did wet my brush before I did that, but I didn't mix it with a whole lot. Now as you can see, I'm leaving some white areas here. And if you feel like it's too dry, your paper's too dry, you just give it another squirt with the water. So I kind of, just am covering this sort of corner of the paper right here. I'll bring this over so you can see. Now it's going to look different when it's dry, but just kind of dab some green into this corner. So no fancy painting technique here. And if you want some darker in some areas, that might be nice. I'm just going back and adding a little bit darker. Yeah.
Scary.
Oh, scary. No,
Scary.
it's fun.
It is. I like it.
But it's a little bit looser than normal, right?
Yeah, it's a little scary to.
Now I also added a little bit of yellow. So I'm going to do that sort of in the same way. Yet this yellow, though, is going to be a little bit more intense than the green. So you might want to just dip your brush in the yellow, bring it out into your mixing area like this and see how intense it is. If you have a scrap of watercolor paper, you could test it. It's not really a big deal, but I'm just going to take some of the yellow and I'm going to just dab some in a couple areas. So you can see I'm using the yellow is a little bit lighter and I'm just dabbing it. So don't be afraid. Really, the magic to this tree comes when we add these branches. So this can just look like a blob for now. It doesn't need to look like anything. And then magically it's going to look like a tree and you're going to see that. And then we go back and we add those branches. So don't get too hung up on what this looks like right now.
We trust you. You're the guide on our trip.
Amen.
It's good for us to do things like this every once in a while, right?
I love it. Every class I get something new out of it. Every class I have to, and I'm not being, what's his name? Eddie Haskell.
Good to do a relaxed something or other now and then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to just work our way around here. We're going to do the same thing with the grass underneath the fox. And if you notice, I don't have any like real definition under here. So we're just going to add some greens and some burnt sienna a little bit. So we're going to do the same technique. We're going to take our spray bottle. And now I'm just sort of spraying this. I'm giving it a couple squirts under the fox. And I would say try to not get too much water on the actual fox, but don't worry about it too much. I can see that I have water on here and it's going to be fine because it's pretty light. And if you're worried about it, you could take a paper towel and just blot it a little bit. But by the time we get back to painting him, this is going to be kind of dry. And also, we're not going to worry too much about this area bleeding into the fox because we kind of actually want that. So if you're worried about that, don't worry about it too much. So again, I'm going to take my brush and my sap green, which I'm noticing I'm running really low on here. And again, I'm just going to dab. So you can see I'm just using the side of my brush and just kind of dabbing some. And I'm not going clear to the edge here, but it's really up to you how much like actual grass you want. I'm just going to kind of let that flow into the water. And you can, even go right up to the tail there a little bit, because by the time we get to the tail and paint over it, this grass is going to be at least almost dry. So you can, maybe if you wanted to, you could make one side a little bit higher than the other. Maybe this side a little bit higher and it kind of slopes off over here. It's up to you. And I'm keeping it kind of light for now. We can always add more. So I've got my green. Now I'm going to dip my brush in this burnt sienna just a little bit. And I'm just going to add some little dabs of burnt sienna here and there. Not a whole lot, probably, maybe like that. And maybe just a little bit of darker green dabs in a couple places under the tail here. I don't want too much at this point. That's probably how I'm going to leave mine. I don't know about you, but my painting is drying pretty fast.
I better get the hairdryer out.
Well, we're going to kind of do this in a way where we don't need it, I don't think. I thought about that, whether we were going to need the hair dryer, but I don't think we will. Hopefully. How's everybody doing with the grass?
Very good.
Okay, so now we're going to add just a little bit of sky here. So I did the same thing. And we're giving the impression of sky. So we're not trying to fill in the whole thing with sky. So I'm just going to do a couple sprays over here on the left-hand side and maybe a spray over here. So I just did like one spray there. So this is going to be sort of the least of what we've done so far. I'm going to bring some of this cerulean blue out into my mixing area just to see the intensity here. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to dab it sort of onto that area that I just sprayed. You might have to look at the side of your paper to see where that is, but it's, we're really going for kind of just like a blotchy look, just to give the impression of the sky being in the background and maybe a little bit down here. And we're going to add some spatters later to kind of tie it all together and add a little bit of texture. So we don't really want to overwork this part. And it's going to look a little different when it's dry. So just let it kind of bleed in there, especially the cerulean. It's a more granulating color. So as it dries, it's going to give a really nice kind of like the pigment is separated look. I don't know. I kind of like that about cerulean. It can work with you and it can work against you.
It's one of my favorite colors to use.
It's lovely.
Yes.
I did a whole series with cerulean blue and Hansa yellow and lemon yellow mixed together.
Nice.
The blue's separate from the yellow,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the two main colors of the paintings.
All right. Everybody good?
Mhm.
So we're going to start on our fox. And I'm going to start with my number 6 brush. And what we're going to do is we're going to just use brush strokes mostly to paint this guy. And we're going to start with the burnt sienna. We're going to kind of build up from there as we go. So we're going to do just a wet on dry technique. So we're just painting the wet paint on the dry paper. So I'm going to dip my brush in the burnt sienna. You can bring it out into your mixing area if you want, just to check the intensity, but we're basically going to be painting right out of the paint well here. And we're going to try to remember to leave the side of the head white. So let me bring my example back over here. So we've got a couple white areas, the end of the tail, and then the side of the snout or cheeks, whatever you want to call it. And we're just going to use brush strokes on this guy. But I'm going to start by just painting in the snout. Now we're going to, don't worry about that nose too much. And we're just straight on painting. And as you come up from the snout, we're going to kind of use the tip of our brush. So I'm kind of holding my brush kind of straight up and down, going around the eyes here, going around that white part. And we're just going to use some brush strokes and just work that paint out to the edge of the head where we have those little lines. And you don't have to be too precise about covering up all of the paper if you want to leave some little white areas in there, but really no fancy technique other than just using brush strokes, because we are going for some texture here with the hair. And I'm working from the inside out and just sort of using the tip of my brush, holding it kind of straight up and down, a little bit to the side, and working my way out so you can see. I'm going to hold this up. As we get to the edge of the head, we're just making those little hairs with the tip of our brush. And don't worry too much about it now, because we're going to go back with our smaller brush and get a little bit more detailed with those edges. But we want it to kind of have some texture. We don't want it to be completely smooth. And we're going to just continue this over the whole body. So now that I've got the head, and don't worry too much about anything being too smooth or finished at this point. I'm just going to kind of keep working, just painting with brush strokes, working my way from the head around the body. And then as I get to these edges where we have those little lines, I'm just leaving those sort of uneven edges, following the curve of those lines. I'm kind of trying to go in the same direction around the body now as we get to this hind leg. I'm going to start going in the direction of that, kind of doing my brush strokes kind of up and around, I guess, with that hind leg. Now we're getting to our grass area. So if you see a little bit of bleeding, if yours isn't completely dry, don't worry, because we do want it to blend a little bit with that grass. Mine's pretty dry, so it's not bleeding in there too much. But we're just working our way around the body. So now just using little brush strokes to go and paint the tail here. And I'm going to hold this up a little bit. You can see I'm not being too worried about covering up all the paper. I've got a little bit of white space showing through, and that's fine because we do want that texture to make it look like fur. I'm just going to keep going along the tail here, and we've kind of got two directions with the tail, one with the fur going down and one with the fur going up towards the body. So I know that's, my hand was kind of in the way, but I'm kind of going up when I go that way and down when I do the bottom of the tail. And then as we get to, I don't know, like right kind of underneath the snout, I'm going to start to leave. I'm going to kind of end the painting of the tail at that point. So I kind of want to leave this area white. So at this point, I'm going to leave this section white, but just paint the edge with those little brush strokes. So there's really not much you can mess up here because we're just painting little brush strokes all the way around this guy. And then don't forget this little edge of the body here. It's kind of like that front little part of the body. I'm just going to paint that all in right up to the side of that white space. So this is like our first layer of the fox. And what we're going to do, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to finish up that part, but then we're going to go right back into it with our smaller brush and that darker brown. And we're just going to kind of go along the edges here and just darken those edges. Everybody doing okay?
Mhm.
Good. So we've got the main fox sort of blocked in. It's just details now. And yeah, I know you've heard me say this before, but for Cindy, who hasn't heard me say it before, painting on 8x10 watercolor paper, you can pop that right into an 11x14 standard size mat. I like to paint on standard size paper during the classes, but you know, you don't have to. But it's a lot cheaper to buy standard size mats than custom made mats. So that's kind of why I stick to the 8x10 size. Sometimes we do 5x7. 5x7 paper will fit directly into an 8x10 mat. And then of course a standard sized frame also. So custom mats and frames can be a little bit spendy. I have this painting here of this
Ooh.
foxglove that I was just playing around with on this odd sized paper, and it ended up, oh, well, I really like it. Well, now I need to buy a custom mat for this one or figure out a really creative way to frame it.
When are we going to do that one?
I'll put it on the schedule if it looks
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, that's a
Yes.
fun one.
I love foxglove.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so we're going to continue on with this guy. Now I've got my number 1 brush here, and if you have burnt umber, it's just a little bit darker brown. So it just looks kind of like that. Now, if you don't have it, you can mix a little bit, and I'm going to use my number 6 brush to mix it just so I can get a little bit more volume of paint. I'm going to take some of that. So this is the burnt sienna, and then you can mix it with either like Payne's gray or ultramarine blue. I'm going to do a little bit of Payne's gray here to get yourself that darker brown. So you don't have to have the burnt umber. So I like to kind of mix it with my number 6 brush and then use my smaller brush because it just takes so long to mix it with your smaller brush. So whichever one you have, that's what we're going to be using now. So I'm just going to take this brush and I'm going to go along, because you probably can still see the pencil lines. But we're just going to go along those edges with our small brush. I'll start on this side so you can see what I'm doing. And we're just going to use the tip of this small brush to just darken the edges, darken the fur along the edges. Now, if you don't have a number 1 brush, you can use the tip of your number 6 brush. Just hold it straight up and down and just use the tip of it like that. Just a little bit easier with the small brush, I think. And I think it makes these little lines nicer if you go from the inside out rather than the outside in. I think you get a nice, like a more tapered brush stroke if you kind of go up and out, but you know, experiment with it to see which way you like the best. So I'm just going to continue along here outside the body. Just adding that little bit more definition, and we're kind of disguising our pencil lines. Now, when you get to the bottom here, it's kind of up to you whether you want to, how much you want to define the bottom of the fox, or do you want it to kind of blend down into the grass? I'm going to leave mine just a little bit more undefined down here, but if you like the look of it being more defined, feel free to do that. I'm just going to kind of let it blend a little bit. And I'm going to continue around. Now, if you have to turn if you have your paper taped down to a, let's call it a mobile board, and you can turn it, that might make it a little bit easier for you. We're just kind of going around. And at this point, it's kind of like up to you how much definition you want. It might be, you know, you like this and that's enough for you. If you want it to be darker, then you can continue to sort of add another layer or glazing of brush strokes over what we just did. I'm probably not going to do too much more myself, but I'm going to add some brush strokes kind of like on the side of the head over here, just to make this sort of inside of the body a little bit darker. So kind of up to you how much definition you want the fur to have. Like at this point, it's kind of the, you know, I'm added a little bit of lighter brush strokes here around that hind leg. We're kind of giving the impression of fur without it being too detailed, which I kind of like. You know, if you wanted to add a little bit more on the top of the head here. I don't really think you need like too much for this guy, and the background is nice and soft, so it kind of works well if we don't get too detailed with the fox. I think I just added a little bit of more definition right where the tail meets that white area. So I'm going to hold this up so you can see sort of what I did a little bit closer.
Oh, thank you.
And then the last two steps we're going to take on the fox are we're going to use our Payne's gray and we're going to paint in the eyes and the nose. And then I like to just glaze a little bit of yellow over the whole body just to kind of warm it up a little bit more. So I'm going to do that. Actually, I'll probably do that first. And you can do this with either your round brush or your #1 brush or your small brush, whichever one you're more comfortable with. But I'm going to get kind of just a little light mix of yellow. Don't need much. And sometimes I do this with paintings. If it doesn't look, you know, if it just doesn't look warm enough, you can glaze yellow over your painting and it just like kind of brings life to it, I think. So I've got this really light mix, and I'm just gonna kind of lightly, you can see I'm just lightly using some brush strokes. And you can't really, I mean, it's not super noticeable, but it just kind of warms it up. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit closer so you can see. Oops, that's a little bit too much. So kind of a light, I've added water to this yellow, and I'm just, you know, you don't have to be precise about it, just kind of glaze some brush strokes like that over the body, just to give it a little bit more warmth. So I don't know if you can see the difference that made, but I think it just kind of added that missing piece. I don't want to rush you, but I am going to keep moving along. You can finish that up later if you're not quite done. Just want to make sure we're coming up on time here. So I don't want to go too far over our time. I'm going to take my small brush and I'm going to dip it in the Payne's gray. And I'm going to paint in the eyes and the nose. So I'm just kind of using the tip of my brush here. Very carefully. You know, I guess you could use a black pen to do this too, if you're not comfortable with the small brush. So little eyes, and then we'll do our little nose. And he's pretty much done. Now, if you wanted to, you could add a little bit of, gosh, I'm like hesitant to do this because this is where I start overworking things. You know, you could add a little bit of green down here under the tail. I would say just not too much because it's so soft. We don't want to really overwork it. I'm not sure that I even like that. I'm going to take my bigger brush. I'm just going to soften that. So I just dipped it in some water and blotted it, and I'm just softening that a little bit. Just blending it in. I don't like that definition there. I don't think we need it. All right. So we'll take one more minute on the fox, let you finish or get to a good stopping point, and then we're going to paint in our branches, and we're going to do some spatters, and then we're done. A couple more minutes and we'll be done. Oh, it looks like actually you are all looking at me and you're ready to go. Okay, so for the tree, I'll show you what I did on this. I think this is okay to put over the top. So I kind of started on the side here. You can use the number 6 brush or the small brush, whichever one you're more comfortable with. And I kind of just started some branches here. And then, you know, if there were some white spaces in between, I put some little branches that kind of peek through. It sort of depends on your painting. It's going to be different than my painting. If you want to just follow along with what I'm doing, that's fine. Or if you want to add the branches where they make the most sense on your painting, that's fine too. But I kind of started with 2 main branches and just kind of followed them out from there, if that makes sense. So I kind of like to look where there are some darker places that I could put the branches behind and some lighter places where I can have them peek through. So probably I'm going to, got this little dark area. I'm going to have my dark branch kind of meet that, or my main branch meet that dark area. And like really whatever you do with this, it's going to look like a branch because we're just making this up. So I've got this main branch here, and maybe I'll do,
We're doing burnt umber on this branch.
oh yes, sorry, I forgot to say, I'm doing burnt umber. So either burnt umber or your burnt sienna mixed with a little bit of Payne's gray. So any dark brown that you have. Thanks.
So you didn't have to say you forgot because I forgot whether you said it or not.
Oh. So I've got my
So-
main branch there and maybe one more up here. So I'm just going to kind of, let's see, I'm going to do one like right here. And you can see I'm kind of like bringing it up to that blob of foliage there. And I'm going to have it branch off as it gets up further. So I think I'll extend this guy out first. So I kind of like to have some little branches that kind of look like they're peeking through from that branch. And then maybe one that's kind of like in the middle right there. And I've got some white space here, so I'm going to take advantage of that. I'm going to have the branch kind of peek through there. Maybe up here, got a little white space. So I'm just making sure it kind of like follows the same line. And then I'm going to have it come out up here. And I'm just, when I get to the end, I'm using more of the tip of my brush just to get a finer line. And I think this is like what makes this tree come alive. I'm going to have some branches peeking out from up here just until the white space disappears. And maybe one that kind of looks like it's going up. And I've got some white space there, so I'll just continue that along. And come out over here somewhere. You don't have to do too many. I think that's probably going to be good for, maybe I'll add one more right there. That branch, and then I'll add some for this branch, just a couple, I think. I'm going to have it peeking through right there in that white space, and maybe this white space here. And could even have this one kind of come out over here somewhere. I'll fake one right here. Have it come up to there. So it kind of depends on, you know, what you're, I'm going to add another one right here actually, because I've got some white space. Just like that. Kind of depends on how your foliage turned out and, you know, how many branches you want. But I think that's pretty good for mine. And if you want to add some little tinier branches at the ends, that can be interesting like that. Once you've got your main branches in there. Everybody doing okay with that?
Mhm.
Okay.
I like the randomness of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll take one more minute on that, and then we're going to do our spatters and we'll be done. While you're finishing that, I kind of noticed that on mine, I didn't define like the side of these white areas of the face. I'm just going to add some little brush strokes on the side here. Okay, so for spatters, we're going to do some green and yellow here. We're going to do the cerulean blue here, and we're going to do some green and burnt sienna down here. And the trick to spatters is to mix some really watery paint. So I'm going to do my green first here. So I brought a little bit of green out into my mixing area. I'm going to spray it a couple times with my spray bottle. So I want it to be real watery. And then I'm just going to load my brush here. So I'm kind of pushing the side of my brush into the paint. And then what I'm going to do, and I'm going to hold my hand so that you can see, because it's not going to be straight up and down when I do it. I'm going to hold this over the paper. So actually I'm going to be holding it like this, but I'm going to be holding my brush like this, and I'm going to tap down firmly with my finger onto the paper. So I'm going to turn it, so I'm facing over the paper, and I'm going to tap down firmly with my finger. So you have to be pretty forceful about it. Now you can also use something else like a pencil and tap down if you don't have the finger strength, but sometimes you get spatters that come back at you when you do that. So just be aware. So this just kind of adds a little bit more texture to our foliage and our painting. I'm going to do the same thing with the yellow. So I'm going to bring, and yellow, this is a very strong yellow. So we want definitely some more water in there. I'm going to add some yellow up in that tree also. So a few more little spatters, makes it look nice. Gives the tree just a little bit more detail and texture. And then the same thing with our cerulean. I've already got some in my mixing area, so I'm just going to make sure I've got a squirt of water in there. Again, you want it to be pretty watery because otherwise the spatters won't come off your brush. The bristles will just hold the paint in there. And I'm just going to add some of that the cerulean spatters up in the sky. It doesn't matter if you get them in the tree, and a little bit down here. And then I'm going to add some of the green and burnt sienna down here. So I'm going to go back into my green puddle here. And I'm just going to spatter down here. Gives us a little bit more texture. Got kind of a white, weird area over here. So spatters kind of help pull that all together. And then same thing with the burnt sienna. I'm going to bring some of that out into my mixing area, add a little bit of water, load my brush, and I'm going to add some of those. I'm going to get some of those kind of like close to the fox if possible, just to kind of tie him in. I'm assuming it's a him, maybe it's a her. My son's name is Fox, so
I have a
that is
friend-
why I'm assuming it's a him.
I have a friend whose name, son, she has twins. One's Fox and one's Maslow.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, they're just beautiful little boys.
Now, if you get a spatter where you don't want it, you can just blot it off. And that's our Sleepy Fox.
Thank you very much.
Oh, did we lose BJ?
Oh,
Yes, we did. Huh.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you very much.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yes.
wonderful.
Any questions before I switch my screen back?
So,
All right. I'm going to switch back here. Okay, well, any other questions I can answer or anything like that?
I really like it.
Okay, good. I will be sending a recording of the video out after the class. It takes me some time to edit it, so it's usually later in the day. And also step-by-step instructions, which will include that drawing that we did, a picture of the drawing. Can't find it right now, but and of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me an email. I'm happy to answer anything or go over anything. I try to not get on the computer on Sundays, so if you don't hear from me on Sunday, I try to get back by Monday. So
Everybody needs a break for sure.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was really fun.
See
And
you
thanks for the idea, Cindy. And I'll
Look
see you
forward to the
soon.
Fox Club too.
Yes. Okay. All right. Have a great weekend.